All right, there we are on the. So I'll start with Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello to everybody at Kalalgoda today. This is Venerable Nissarano, and as was announced, I will be there in Colombo in 2 weeks, and I will be with you hopefully for the in-person, physically, as Rahanta Mate was saying, for the next monthly meditation at Kalalgoda. I think it's on the 26th of February. So, and it's of course, I am doing this Zoom session from Australia, from Melbourne, outside Melbourne actually, at Newbury Buddhist Monastery. And you can see the Buddha statue behind me. And this is the meditation hall here at Newbury Buddhist Monastery. So, wonderful that, what a good way for everyone to welcome in the new year, 2023. Actually, we have a number of new years, but anyway, this is the first. There will be others coming. And of course, it's great to be meditating together. This is something that we can then make the new year really good, can't we? Because we are developing our minds in peace and clarity and in positive mind states, joyful mind states. And you can think of this as interior decoration, or real interior decoration, or you could think of it as the Buddha's beauty parlor for the mind. And this is where all our experience comes from, doesn't it? From within ourselves, not from without us, not from outside ourselves, because our minds tend to color whatever we experience. And if we have negative mind states, that's how the world will appear. If we're feeling fearful or depressed, then that's how the world will appear. But if we have happiness and peace in our minds, if we have some joy in our minds, piti sukha in our minds, then the world will appear like that. And of course, this is no surprise, because the Buddha mentions our minds are the forerunner of all things. And we have that famous Dhammapada verse that all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. And speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows, as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. So this is a very good thing that we are doing by dedicating a day to meditation, to develop the mind in good qualities, to develop the mind in wisdom. This is the very important thing that will change everything for us. And for the last, I think, 2 sessions, Zoom sessions, I've been talking about. Can you hear? Is it okay? Sound okay? The 4 Noble Truths. And of course, the previous, I think the previous one was the 2nd Noble Truth, the Noble Truth of the origin of unsatisfactoriness or suffering. And I've also dealt with the 1st Noble Truth. So today, I thought I would focus on the good news, the 3rd Noble Truth. Because of course, if the Buddha only taught the 1st and the 2nd Noble Truth, wow. Well, if he taught only the 1st, we would know that we'd know a lot about suffering. If he taught the 2nd Noble Truth, only the 2nd Noble Truth, we'd know where it came from. But what to do with it, how to abandon it, how to let go of it is our job. And of course, the 3rd Noble Truth is all about letting go of it, of dukkha, letting go of unsatisfactoriness, letting go of suffering, big time, totally, completely. And so I'll focus on this third noble truth today. And I gave a talk on this in our Buddhist society here, and I called it "You Don't Own Me." You don't own me, the third noble truth. And the truth, the cessation of unsatisfactoriness or suffering. And I'll explain that title when we later in the talk, because often we actually, I think most people realize that we tend to own our suffering, and we tend to own our craving in particular. So I'll start with the third noble truth, and I'll do it in Pali because I think many of you know it in Pali. So idang ko pana bhikkhave dukkha nirodhang arya satchang yotasayeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho jago patinissago mutti analayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So wonderful verse, wonderful statement by the Lord Buddha. And of course, the translation in English is, now this is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It's the fading away and cessation of that very same craving with nothing left. With nothing left over, giving it away, letting it go, releasing it, and not adhering to it. And that, of course, is Ajahn Nissarano, Bhante Sujato's, Venerable Sujato's translation. And most of you will remember from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta that the Lord Buddha mentions that our job is to realize the cessation of suffering. He has realized it, but it is our job to realize it. And so I would like to ask everyone, what does the realization of the cessation of suffering mean? And of course, I think most people know that it refers to, what does it refer to? It refers to becoming fully awakened. And it's about realizing nirvana, isn't it? Realizing the end of suffering, realizing the end of the defilements. And of course, a person that becomes fully awakened, fully enlightened, arahant or rahat in Sinhala. And of course, there are two types, aren't there? There's the one that the arahant with something left over. And of course, that's sa upadi, sesa nibbana. But that, of course, what's left over? The body and the mind until the body passes away. And then, of course, the second type is parinibbana, when there is nothing left over, the body and mind cease. And that is the end, completely the end of suffering. And so oftentimes people, don't they, when we're talking about nirvana, it's a sort of a bit of an unknown quantity. Everybody is, Ajahn Brahm mentions this in talks actually, everybody's striving towards nibbana, but they don't know what nibbana is. And of course, we will really not know until we realize it, will we? But this question obviously arose in the time of the Buddha too. And he mentioned, a Brahmin asked him, the Brahmin Janasoni, he asked lots of good questions actually from the Lord Buddha. And he says, asked him about nibbana being, there we go, nibbana being directly visible. And the Buddha replied, when Brahman, one experiences a destruction of lust with nothing left over, with the destruction of hatred with nothing left over, and the destruction of delusion with nothing left over, it is in this way too that nibbana is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, and to be personally experienced by the wise. And of course, that is, isn't it? That's the qualities of the Dhamma. So it is to be realized in this very life. It's not something like we have to wait until after the body passes away until we experience it. It can be experienced in this life. And what is that experience? It's the complete ending, the complete cessation of all those defilements in the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so we can ask why, when we talk about the third noble truth, it's all about dukkha nirodha, isn't it? The cessation of suffering. We call it cessation in English. One can wonder why the Buddha used a word like cessation, nirodha, when talking about dukkha. And instead of, say, something more active, like putting an end to dukkha or making an end of dukkha. But of course, cessation gives us a sense of things naturally ceasing, naturally finishing, not due to a self, to a me, not due to willpower, sankhara. Of course, willpower is coming from sankhara. That's the aspect of our minds, isn't it? Sankhara. That's we have these intentional activities. I call it intentional activities. Ajahn Brahm calls it the will or the doer, the sankharas. And of course, that famous quote about the sankharas, house builder, you have been seen, and the rafters destroyed, and the ridgepole removed. So this is Ajahn Brahm's translation of sankhara. I quite like choices too. This is something that Ajahn Sujato and Venerable Nyanamoli use. But of course, the whole process of the third noble truth is dependent cessation. Having understood the Four Noble Truths, ignorance fades away and ceases. And when that ignorance fades away and ceases, we fully understand intentional activities or choices or will, or body, speech, and mind. That will cease too, to make karma for a new birth. And then as a result, no new consciousness is generated, and the other factors of dependent origination cease one by one. So this, of course, is dependent cessation, not the arising of dukkha. We all know about that from our own experience, don't we? So, and I'll just read what it says, the dependent translation of dependent cessation. This is the great good news of the Buddha's teaching. We have dependent origination, don't we? That's the arising of dukkha, the arising of unsatisfactoriness and suffering. And dependent cessation is the good news. This is how all that suffering can end, how old age, sickness, and death can end. And of course, with dependent cessation, it begins with ignorance. When ignorance fades away and ceases, with nothing left over, choices cease. When choices cease, consciousness ceases. This is vijnana, isn't it? When consciousness ceases, name and form cease, nama rupa. And when name and form cease, the sixth sense fields cease. And when the sixth sense fields cease, this is the salayatana, contact ceases. And when contact ceases, feeling ceases. And when feeling ceases, craving ceases. That's a very important area, isn't it? It's the focus of the third noble truth. And then when craving ceases, grasping ceases, upadana. And when grasping ceases, continued existence ceases. And when continued existence ceases, rebirth ceases. And when rebirth ceases, old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress cease. This is how the entire mass of suffering ceases. So this is good news for us, the cessation of that entire mass of suffering. And I think most of you know and would be aware of what the insight is that leads what is the insight that leads to the first breakthrough, stream entry, to see the Dhamma? What is that insight? And of course, it's impermanence, isn't it? Anicca, or in similar, or Sanskrit, anitya. And I'd like to use a story from the time of the Buddha of Venerable Assaji. It's really about how Venerable Sariputta had his breakthrough to the Dhamma. And I think this gives us an idea of how we can break through to the Dhamma. And Venerable Sariputta, he was a layperson still, he was Upatissa. And he saw Venerable Assaji, one of the first 5 disciples of the Lord Buddha, going on alms round in Rajagaha, where the bamboo grove is. And he was so impressed because Venerable Assaji was so mindful and restrained, so peaceful, and so graceful that he followed him and while he was going on alms round, and asked him after the alms round, "Who is your teacher?" He was so impressed. And what had this teacher taught you? And of course, I think it's very nice. Venerable Assaji said, "Well, I'm only new to this Dhamma, so I'm not very experienced in it. But what my teacher, I can give you a teaching in brief of what my teacher taught me." And what did he say? And this is very, very brief, isn't it, really? "Whatever things arise from a cause, of them the Tathagata, the Buddha, has told the cause and of the cessation of them. Such is the teaching proclaimed by the great monk or great samana." And that's what he told Venerable Sariputta. And of course, arising from a cause is a very important term, a phrase, isn't it? Because it points to conditionality, the fact that that everything is running on cause and effect. And having arisen, things must end, they must break down and disintegrate. And it's the nature of everything in this world that we experience. And of course, he told the cause of them, and of course it's conditionality again, but this is also, isn't it, wanting or craving, tanhaya. So this is the second noble truth, the samudaya of the 4 noble truths. And the good news, the cessation of them, which shows the impermanence of all the causes and conditions supporting the continuation of everything. They can't last. And also, very importantly, cessation of craving and the ending of suffering because of that. This is the 3rd noble truth. And when Venerable Sariputta heard this, he immediately became a stream enterer, just hearing this verse. And they say, the dustless, stainless eye of the Dhamma arose, yam kinchi samudaya dhammam sambhantam nirodha dhammanti. That's nice. So whatever is of the nature to arrive, samudaya, also like origin, really, isn't it? All that is of the nature to cease, nirodha. And a stream enterer, as Venerable Sariputta was at that stage, sees the Dhamma. And this is what Venerable Anya Kandanya did during the first teaching by the Lord Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the setting in motion of the wheel of Dhamma. But an arahant realizes it. So this is the 3rd noble truth, really, where it comes into play. And what's more, when Venerable Sariputta told his friend Kolita about his encounter with Venerable Assaji, and he recited this verse again, then he too became a stream enterer. And this was, of course, Venerable Mahamoggallana, and they both became Buddhist monks. Now, we've heard it. Are we stream enterers? I think hearing it is not, we've got to hear it from the source, as it were. And this is a very important part of the Buddha's teaching, isn't it? The importance of the hearing the word of the Buddha from one who's realized it. And so this is something that this transmission almost, in a sense, happens. And this impermanence that the Buddha talked about, what did he say about this nature of the nature of impermanence? Well, of course, conditionality is a big part of it, because everything in the world arises from a cause. They must break down. Whatever arises from a cause has to be impermanent. But impermanence is really the fundamental nature of reality. And I think this is something that most people find difficult. They fight against impermanence, especially when it comes to the appearance of our bodies and things like that. We fight against it as much as possible. And of course, I call it the fly in the ointment of samsara. Impermanence is actually just the essence of samsara, really. And the cause of dukkha is this impermanence. And the Buddha mentions that in suttas, and I'll quote it in a little while, that whatever is impermanent, that will lead to suffering. And that suffering or unsatisfactoriness or imperfection, I quite like. So that being the case, we can't find that permanent happiness that human beings, all beings really, are seeking, or that permanent satisfaction. Everything is always temporary and changing. And so also whatever is impermanent, and therefore suffering, the Lord Buddha mentions, is not worthy of being called a self. So we can't find a permanent I, me, or myself. People are looking for that everywhere, aren't they? They're trying to, in many different ways, to build up this sense of I or me. And when a person cannot find this, then they realize this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. And then the mind lets go. It becomes, they say dispassionate, but it lets go and is liberated from the taints or the corruptions, the asaras, by non-clinging. And I'll just quote the very nice teaching where it puts it very succinctly from the Buddha. And he says, monks, form, feeling, perception, intention or will or choice, that's sankhara, and consciousness are impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering is non-self. What is non-self should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. When one sees this thus, as it really is with correct wisdom, the mind becomes dispassionate and is liberated from the taints by non-clinging. And this is a nice bit. Being liberated, the mind is steady. By being steady, it is content. By being content, one is not agitated. Being unagitated, one personally attains nirvana. One understands. Destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for the state of being. So this is like, I quite like the simile of the, Ajahn Brahmali uses it quite a lot too, the chick breaking out of the egg. The Lord Buddha uses that, but generally uses it for the tevijja, like when the first knowledge is seeing past lives, is like when the chick puts its beak through the shell for the first time. And then the second one is when sees the workings of karma, and the second breaking through the shell. And the third one is, of course, the destruction of the corruptions of the mind. And this is a usual interpretation, but one can also think of it it's not used by the Buddha in this way as the breaking through to impermanence, anicca, to unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and of course to non-self. So one can ask, how do these insights lead to the fading away and cessation of that very same craving with nothing left over? So obviously it's seeing impermanence brings with it the other characteristics of existence. These characteristics are actually the nature of reality, aren't they? And unsatisfactoriness and non-self. Impermanence, and of course, in terms of the third noble truth, that impermanence really, because the third noble truth is all about the fading away of craving, complete fading away and destruction of craving. And that craving, seeing the impermanence of craving, you can call it wanting, that's Ajahn Brahm uses, and I think it's good. Choosing or expecting, there's lots of words we could use for it. We see that it has arisen due to conditions. This craving has arisen due to conditions. It is, as the Buddha often mentions, dependently arisen. It hasn't arisen because of a self or me or whatever, and that it is conditioned. It's a process. So it can cease when the conditions cease. It's not permanent. And that's particularly true of craving. And of course, the other aspect of understanding dukkha is that we see that craving is in fact, or wanting is in fact, is dukkha. It is unsatisfactory. Because immediately we want something, we have this feeling of incompleteness. We are not happy in the present moment. So we move and we won't be happy until we've actually got what we want. We see that this craving is really, it's not our best friend. Often this is what people think of craving as, it's going to lead to me getting what I want, what I need, what will make me happy in the future, not now, in the future. So it is the nature of craving. And as I mentioned last time, we are, all unenlightened people are slaves to this craving or wanting. We are, and I think we don't realize that the craving, this wanting, is actually running us. It's the slave driver. We aren't, but we think we are. We are the ones that are choosing, that are wanting, that are craving. So this is the nature of dukkha, of dukkha. And of course, the third aspect is directly understanding non-self. That's what makes a big difference in the third noble truth too. There isn't a permanent I or me or myself in here. And it's always been a process. And of course, this means that this craving, which we often, as I say, we think we own or belongs to us, or we're originating it, we realize that it's just an aspect of the mind. It's a very strong movement of the mind, intentional activity of the mind. And this, when we see that it's arisen as a part of a process, that it's not me, it's not mine, I don't own it, then we can let go. Then craving can be let go of. And of course, this craving also is abandoned temporarily in jhanas, isn't it? So when we think of the Lord Buddha's statement about the third noble truth, of course, he mentions the four ways that lead to craving ceasing. And I'll read that again because I think it's a very important part of understanding the third noble truth. It's the fading away and cessation of that very same craving with nothing left over, giving it away. letting it go, releasing it, and not adhering to it. Now, I think many of you might have heard or watched Ajahn Brahm's talk on these 4 ways of letting go. He calls it 4 ways of letting go. It's in fact his most popular talk on the internet, and which is good if people can actually understand it, and letting go can happen. Someone told me the reason that it is part of the reason it is most popular is because on the internet, if you use 4 in the title of a video, it becomes more popular. I'm not quite sure how that works. So, but if you reflect on that, the way that statement by the Lord Buddha, doesn't it sound like we possess this craving? We're giving craving away. Can we give away something that's not ours, that we think is not ours? Letting craving go. So we're the one, we're holding on to it, releasing craving and not adhering to or sticking to craving. And of course, I think this makes it very clear to me when you actually fill in it with craving, it makes it very clear that there's a sense of this belongs to us, that it is, we are craving. and it's just like an expression of ourselves. But we can ask, is this really the case? I think for most people, they can't imagine that it is anything else than our craving, that I'm generating it, I'm making it happen, because it feels like this. And when we have these strong cravings, these strong desires, craving is this sort of strong desire for something that we've experienced through the senses and in the mind. And it reminds me of when Ajahn Chah was talking, he was actually talking about the body, but I think it equally applies to the mind. And he says, if this body could talk, it would be telling us all day long, you don't own me, you don't own me. Actually, it's telling us all the time, but it's Dhamma language, so we're unable to understand it. It's good, isn't it? But of course, this doesn't only apply to the body, and I think most of us, especially as we get older, we're aware that we aren't the owners. We cannot control, make the body not stop the body from getting old, aging, and passing away. This is the nature of bodies. And of course, it does bring up the question, as some people will say, well, who does own this body and mind? And of course, I like Ajahn Brahm's, his answer to this, which is nature. Nature owns this body particularly, and the mind really. And it comes about through causes and conditions. And part of that is force, part of this is the impermanence, the nature of reality and change and decay. And that this is an ownerless process. It's not a process we own. And so it makes it fairly obvious that even though for each of us we think this craving is me, I'm the one that's craving, and the Lord Buddha is actually showing us or pointing out to us that we don't own it, that it is something that arises in the mind. It's a mental state that arises. And of course, he shows, and we all know very much how this wanting and craving arises. We know the process, but we tend, when we tend to take, when we own craving, we don't keep this in mind, that it comes from a process of, dependent origination, not from me or from willing it. Based on ignorance, we experience the senses and feelings arise, don't they? And because of that, we crave want to get something, or often to get rid of something. And it's always what we have seen, heard, smelt, tasted, felt, and even in the mind as well. And seeing, and a good example, for us, I mean, it's a very easy example actually, is if you see an advertisement for something, a pleasant feeling arises, or an unpleasant feeling if you don't like it. And as a result, a craving or wanting arises. And it's a very easy process to see. And then because we have that desire, then we have to cling to it. That is the aspect of upadana, attachment. Usually that clinging, it really comes in the form when we have experienced a craving that we found satisfying, we enjoyed, and then we really cling to it, we really attach to it as being part of our happiness. So, and I like where in the Digha Nikaya, the Lord Buddha says to us, wherever in the world there is anything agreeable and pleasurable, there the cessation of wanting comes about. This is Ajahn Brahm's translation. And what is there in the world that is agreeable and pleasurable? Sight in the world is agreeable and pleasurable. Hearing, smell, taste, touch, and knowing is agreeable and pleasurable. And there this wanting comes to be abandoned. There its cessation comes about. So that also reminds me of Ajahn Chah, who said, peace is within oneself, to be found in the same place as agitation and suffering. It is not found in a forest or on a hilltop, nor is it given by a teacher. Where you experience suffering, you can also find freedom from suffering. Trying to run away from suffering is actually running towards it. Isn't that a great saying? It's a wonderful saying that where we discover, and where is that place that we experience agitation and suffering? In the mind. And this is where we will find freedom, where we can find cessation. When we understand that it is a process, that it is a process of conditionality, dependent origination, and the essential nature of reality has always been this impermanence, this unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. So this is the real understanding that changes everything. And I'd like to finish with that was from the Digha Nikaya, I should say, that one from the previous one from the Buddha, and the next one, the last one to finish off, is one from the linked discourses, and it's called Self-Examination, Samma-Sana, and it's this is where the Lord Buddha says, there were ascetics and Brahmins of the past who saw the things that seem nice and pleasant in the world as impermanent, as suffering, as not self, as diseased and as dangerous. They gave up craving. Giving up craving, they gave up attachments. Giving up attachments, they gave up suffering. Giving up suffering, they were freed from rebirth, old age and death, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness and distress. They were freed from suffering, I say. And then the Lord Buddha mentioned, and there will be ascetics and Brahmins in the future, and there are ascetics and Brahmins in the present who are practicing in this way. So I'd like to finish by just mentioning that, of course, the path that leads to the cessation of unsatisfactoriness, of suffering, is always the Noble Eightfold Path. In order to see these things, to see cessation, we need the whole of the Noble Eightfold Path, a particularly right view, because that'll be the breakthrough, won't it? For the stream enterer is perfecting view, seeing the eye of Dhamma opening. And of course, we need right mindfulness, right stillness, or right samadhi. And that will lead, when we practice the Noble Eightfold Path, it will lead us to the results. It's always very interesting. Ajahn Brahm mentions it quite often, that when he was looking for the Noble Eightfold Path in the numerical discourses, the Anguttara Nikaya, where did he find it? Under the eights? No, under the tens, because the Noble Eightfold Path, of course, has another two factors, which the Lord Buddha doesn't usually emphasize, which is, of course, we are developing the Noble Eightfold Path in order for the arising of right knowledge, samajnana. And of course, this is, isn't it, the knowledge of the third noble truth? And then in order, this is the 10th factor, for samavimukti, right liberation. This is the tenfold path, really, the two aspects of realization that occur with the Noble Eightfold Path. And it's always interesting to reflect, well, why did the Lord Buddha only emphasize the Noble Eightfold Path, but not the other two factors? And I suspect, it's only my idea, that these are the factors we need to practice in order for those realizations to occur. They will naturally occur if we practice the Noble Eightfold Path in the way recommended by the Lord Buddha. So I would like to finish the talk here on the third noble truth. You don't own me. You don't own me craving, really. We don't own craving. And this is the cessation of suffering, the cessation of the defilements, and the cessation of rebirth, of coming back to birth again and again, coming back to old age, sickness and death again and again. So it is very, very good news for us. and of course, this is the very positive message of the Lord Buddha. So I'd like to finish there and to ask if there are any questions from people about this talk, or any aspect of meditation. That's fine. There's no problem.
Not yet, Bhante. No more, no questions. I generally the questions happen after this, during the second session.
Oh, I think I saw something flash up. There was some name came up, so I think maybe it's an online question. But this is a good sign. I often at the meditation evenings we have here in Melbourne at our city centre, I always ask at the end, and it's more like a test really, are there any questions or any comments or any complaints? And usually it's very silent. And I think, wonderful, that's a good sign, because our minds are always chattering away, always describing our experience, always the questions coming up in the mind. And so we can tell that the meditation is going well when the mind becomes more peaceful, starts to settle down, and this internal commentary reduces and can stop. And for those that have experienced when the thought goes completely and there is this silence in the mind, of course that's an absolutely wonderful experience to have, because we're so used to living by this, as it were, this noisy road, like living next to a highway and all the traffic that's going there. But when that traffic stops, oh, so peaceful. When those thoughts stop, isn't it so peaceful? We can't believe it. And so this is an experience that meditators can develop. And it's something that's very useful, something that is powerful really for us, because it tells us something about thinking, doesn't it? We often, like craving, we think we are the thinking, and so we can't let it be, let it go. We can't ignore it. We take it very personally, and as a result suffer. But one of the things I think is very nice, I use it in my meditation quite a lot, is when there's a lot of thinking in the mind, to remember Ajahn Brahm, his encouragement to noble silence. And it's usually when he puts his finger to his lips with a big smile. And that reminds me of, this silence in the mind, because that's really where noble silence comes about. Of course, very useful at Kalalgoda and other meditation places to have that silence, and that helps us to lessen the thinking and all the internal commentary or dialogue that's going on, all the internal description. So wonderful, so great, very, very good. You passed the test. You passed the test of flying colours, as they say. So this is good. And as I mentioned before, wonderful that you're spending the early part of the new year in such a good way, developing the mind. Not so many people are not doing this, so it's a very useful thing for us to do, to really develop our inner treasure. And this is where, as I said before, our experience of the world is really coming from. And it can be where we can contribute so much to the world, because the quality of our minds and the quality of our hearts, it's not only for our own benefit, and you can see that when you meet really peaceful people, wise people, it touches us and they affect others as well and inspire us too, which is very important. That it's possible for us to develop this deep peace, this deep wisdom. And this is the deep wisdom of cessation, really, understanding this whole process can cease, which is only possible, really, if things are impermanent and can change. If there was a permanent I or me in here, then of course that is not possible. You can't change something that is permanent. So in a sense, impermanence is good news too, even though at times it's troublesome and also dukkha, also unsatisfactory and suffering as well. So I encourage, wonderful that you're there at Kalalgoda, and I continue with your meditation, and hopefully this talk on cessation, and I will give a guided meditation this afternoon for you, on which will be sort of around the idea of cessation, things ceasing, or as I like to, Ajahn Brahm likes to call it too, stopping, or sometimes people are afraid of stopping, so I say pausing. But to be able to pause, to be able to stop, to allow things to cease is really something amazing, something we can do when there is wisdom in the mind, when there is peace in the mind, and that letting go that doesn't try to control things, and then just allows that process to cease, realizing it is part of nature. Yeah. So I'd like to finish here, and if you have any questions this afternoon, you're welcome. But as I say, after the meditation, well, who knows? I doubt that there will be so many questions. Are there any questions before we finish off?